Hello, I'm Dr. Nina Wilson. I run the clinic One Woman Health, which specialises in midlife healthcare for women. Something that I see a lot of in clinic, in the safe space of a consultation, is women who want to talk about what's happening to their sex lives. Women in midlife can often experience a number of challenges around sex and their sex lives. So I'm here today, very, very pleased to welcome Ruth Ramsay, adult sex educator and sex coach, to see what kind of help might be available to address these challenges. Ruth, welcome.
Hello, I'm very much looking forward to having this chat because when we're addressing these kind of challenges, the medical approach and the coaching approach together is where we can often see the biggest change.
You know, I think that's absolutely right, because when I talk to a lot of women, they might come and we can talk about what's happening with hormones and HRT and considering testosterone. But I'll often ask the question, is this something that you can talk about with your partner? And quite frequently the answer is no, or people have tried and it hasn't gone very well. So it's really clear that there is a need for people to be able to access support and for people to be able to learn to have some of these difficult conversations. Is that something that you work with?
Yes, I mean, I typically find that when a woman's on a discovery call, which is the free half-hour chat for me to find out a bit more about them, share a bit more about coaching and establish whether it's coaching that they need or something else such as therapy. Probably 4 out of 5 times I'm hearing, I've never told anyone this before, I've never spoken about this before. Typically women are very nervous, very flustered. Part of my role at the start is putting them at ease and letting them know that it is okay to talk. So then typically once they get started, there's kind of no stopping them. It's supposed to be a half-hour call, but quite often it goes over.
It must be amazing to have that freedom. You know, I think a lot of people are living with anxieties, concerns and so on, and not knowing how to open it. So when you get that opportunity, it must be really liberating.
Absolutely, and sometimes it's so liberating that they then feel able to have a conversation with their partner. What I quite often find, and it's a source of frustration but also a source of great joy, is that sometimes at the end of a discovery call a woman will say, I definitely want coaching, I feel so much better, I feel so much more positive. Something I'll always ask is, why is now the right time? To try and assess whether realistically this is a good time for them. Maybe they're saying, yes, it's the right time. And yes, I definitely want coaching. And I'll say, do you need some time to think about it? No, I want to go ahead. And I'll send them the coaching agreement and the invoice. And then I'll get an email the next day saying, actually, I told my husband, I was on such a high, I told my husband that we'd spoken, and then we spent the whole evening having this incredible in-depth conversation about sex like we've never had, and then we had amazing sex for the first time in years, and I don't think I need coaching anymore.
Oh, okay, well that's pretty effective.
Yeah, exactly. And in those cases it shows just how kind of being given permission and being shown that it's okay and being given hope itself can be all that's needed to kind of unlock great change. But then, as I say, when I get one of those, I'm like, well, I've not got a coaching client, but how fantastic. But then for other people who do decide to embark on a coaching journey or on a course that I run, when it comes to talking with a partner, that's very commonly a difficult point for them.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. And I mean, I get insights into this in my consultations, but what do you think is it that makes it so difficult?
Well, first of all, typically none of us have talked about sex explicitly with other people. We don't see examples of conversations around sex. We certainly don't see it in porn, but we also typically don't see it in the mainstream either. Be that in film or social media or books or anything, we're not shown that it's okay to have these conversations. And in fact, we've probably been brought up being told it's wrong to talk about it.
Right.
So we're shut down. As women, we're told it's wrong. As men, they're typically told you should know it all. If you need to ask, there's something wrong.
Yes.
So from both sides, we're kind of shamed around feeling any need to talk about sex. And then a big thing is we don't understand what we're talking about.
Okay.
So
tell us more about that.
If we don't have any understanding of, or only very limited understanding, beyond reproductive biology, which is what sex ed typically was for most people. If we don't understand our anatomy, we don't understand the basics of sex science that apply to everyone, let alone how that applies uniquely to us, then how can we talk about it? So for me, an example I like to give to explain this is that I drive a car, but I don't understand anything about cars, really. So if I developed a problem and if my husband wasn't around to explain it and I went into a mechanic's, I'd just be like, it's not working. And I wouldn't be able to say, these things are wrong, these things, this is how it's behaving strangely. I wouldn't have the understanding or the vocabulary. And that's a position that most people are in sexually as well. How can we talk about something if we don't even understand it ourselves? So when you combine those things, never seeing examples of talking about it, being shamed, whichever gender we are, around talking about it, and then actually not knowing what we're talking about, then it's no surprise that we're not comfortable. The one other thing I do hear a lot is women saying every other aspect of our relationship is fantastic. He's my best friend, I love him, we're a great team. And so they're kind of scared to go there with this topic, and maybe they fear ruin something that's great in other ways as well.
Yes. So fear, that is a really interesting thing to pick up on, because it feels to me from the conversations I have that it is a big theme holding people back from having these conversations. I think when people's sex lives, it isn't working for them, it's a very difficult situation. I think what I've learned is it's extremely personal for everybody. It can be very, very different, but addressing the conversation often involves emotions that we really don't like. Fear of rejection. If I initiate sex and I'm rejected, that's going to feel awful. But also what that means for us emotionally, for our own safety. Does that mean my partner doesn't love me anymore, doesn't find me desirable? And for quite a few people, that can almost lead to, and does that mean that we're going to split up in time? So it can be safer, or it can feel safer, to remain silent on this. And I imagine that comes up for you when you're talking to people?
Yes, but I then talk to people when the problems caused by staying silent are ending up becoming bigger and feeling more of a threat than doing something about it. So people have typically been in a state of fear and embarrassment and shame, and a lot of guilt comes up as well. I'm not a good wife, I'm letting him down. Women think it's all their fault, which is something we can come on to in a moment. So there's been a lot of fear, and the more fearful we become and guilty and stressed we become, the less likely we are to be able to feel desire and want sex. So it's a downward spiral. But then typically I talk to women at the point where they're at the bottom of that spiral, and not doing anything about this has become more painful than actually doing something about it.
Sure, yeah. So I think that's right. So you were saying that perhaps we would talk about that a bit more. People feeling that it's all on them. Coming back to what you were saying about not having the vocabulary, I think we're also not led to realise how normal it is to have a mismatch in desire at various in a couple over the lifespan, and changes in our own personal levels of desire over our lifespan. So when that happens, as it does tend to happen to most people at some point, and in most relationships, again, we're stuck not knowing what to do about it. And part of what I do initially is to normalise the fact that is the case. But so if people want to start to address it, is it better to come to you just one-on-one for that discovery call, or do you find it more helpful to see couples?
Well, if a couple wants coaching, I'll always have a one-to-one session with each of them first.
Right.
Because even a couple who say, we're in love, we still fancy each other, our sex life exists but isn't as good as we want it to be, and who seem very, very open and who are very tactile with each other on the discovery call, even in that case there will be things that it's a benefit for them to get off their chests in an entirely confidential space. And what I try to do is have both of those one-to-one calls on the same evening. So it's not the case that maybe the husband's had his on the Monday night and the wife's waiting a week. Well, what did you talk about with Ruth? And I have to wait. So we try and do them together. And then in a coaching journey, whether it's one-to-one or two-to-one, singles or one person at a time or a couple, there's always a large part that needs to be done alongside that in terms of education. So this is why I'm an adult sex educator and coach, and I always get that sex educator bit in first, because as we said a few minutes ago, if you don't understand how anatomy, arousal, etc. works, and the biopsychosocial aspects that all feed into that, then you're not empowered to talk about it confidently.
So it's really back to basics to begin with.
Absolutely. What I try to do is provide that education. So it might be through resources directly that I provide, it might be books, podcasts. I create bespoke workbooks depending on how that client's initial knowledge. And the client does that in their own time, because I don't want to use valuable talking time on education. So it's here's the educational journey, which you're going to do in your own time, and then when we're talking, we can go deep on what exactly does all this mean for you, what resonates, what do you need to explore, what brings up fear, and then make what they're learning entirely sort of personalised to what they need. And then, as you'll know, coaching is very forward-looking, so then it's about what action steps are you going to take towards change.
Okay, so this is a really important point, because when I talk to people about getting support, I think one thing that holds people back was captured by something somebody said to me recently, which was, am I going to be told I have to dress up in a nurse's uniform? So, people can be afraid to access help because they're worried that that it's going to involve them being made to do things that they don't want to do. Now, that's not the case, is it? And tell us.
Yeah.
From what you've said, it's more thoughtful, it's reflective, and of course there are some actions to put in place as well. But it's not about being told to do certain things. Is that right? Absolutely
not. So people from a business background tend to understand coaching as a kind of sit down and talk and plan and come up with actions. That's how they understand coaching, but people who aren't from the business world will think of sports coaching, football coaching, etc. And they'll say, well, are you going to be in our bedroom watching us and telling us what to do?
Okay.
So no, that's not the case. It's a conversational process to help somebody deeply understand their mind and their body. So how they got to where they are now in their sexual life, what's working, what isn't, what they might like instead, what they might want to explore. And then how to communicate that and how to bring aspects of that into reality. So I would never dictate that anybody does anything.
No.
But so certainly not, no, you have to wear a nurse's uniform. However, if someone might have a fantasy around that they feel deep shame about,
possible,
but that came up in coaching, and then it would be supporting them to understand that fantasy, become comfortable with it, and then how to raise it with a partner, and then if that was a positive response, how to safely bring that into reality.
Okay. So it sounds like, if there are no-go areas or things that people perhaps come up against, you can go at the pace of the individual or the couple.
Absolutely, entirely at their pace.
That sounds that's really important, isn't it?
Yeah.
That sounds great.
Yeah.
So, also something that people might be interested to know, are you able to tell us what the difference between sex coaching and sex counselling is?
So coaching is a forward-looking process for people who feel ready and able to make active change in their sex life and who aren't held back by unresolved trauma from the past.
Okay.
Counselling and therapy is for people who have incidents in their past that they need to come to a place of peace with in order to be able to look forward. So if on a discovery call a woman said to me, my previous relationship was very abusive, I want to get into a new sexual relationship with someone, but as soon as I start getting physically close to anyone, I shut down, I feel panic, then I would say, you need therapy or counselling, and I would help that person find the right support, and I would check in with them a week or 2 weeks later to check they'd found that support. So it's not a case of you need a therapist, it's not me.
Yeah.
And sometimes people have therapy and then they contact me and say, now I'm in a place. Whereas if that same person further on in her journey said, you need to know I've got a background of an abusive relationship, that for a long time trying to get close to someone new I felt shut down, I felt triggered, but I have worked with a therapist, and I now feel able to positively look forward,
take the next step.
That's when coaching comes into play. And
Brilliant.
Often on a discovery call, what I'm doing is trying to establish, does this person need therapy or counselling, or are they ready for coaching?
I see. So to get that established right at the beginning.
But there are so many people who need coaching.
Right.
Yeah, who just are not happy in their sexual lives, and are able to look forward positively kind of once they're given permission to.
And some tools.
And some tools, yeah.
Well, tell us about that. Tell us about some people I guess confidentiality, but give us some ideas of how coaching has gone for people.
Well, I'll give you a typical from a woman in midlife. So this is kind of made up from a few clients. Typically, the sexual side of the relationship will have been either non-existent or unsatisfying for quite a long time. And something has happened in her life that's made her feel we need to sort this out now. So kids getting older, not necessarily leaving home, although that can be the moment, but when they're getting into their teens and starting to have sleepovers and you've got a bit more time with your partner, and then it's a case of, well, our sex life
you can't avoid it anymore.
Yeah. Very often that woman then looks back at the sex that she was having from her first experience through to maybe having kids, and acknowledges it wasn't that good. So she said, okay, I want to restart my sex life, and she looks back at the sex life she had and is like, but actually that wasn't that good. It was very much about pleasing a partner. It was from feeling that either I needed to be a good girl and not be sexual, or I needed to be a sort of goddess porn star and feeling guilt that she wasn't one thing or the other. Early experiences typically with partners who themselves weren't very skilled. And then she meets her now husband in the first few months with someone who we're very physically attracted to. Of course, there's brain chemicals going crazy. There's so much which supports our ability to feel desire. Then that starts to wane, but then the parenting journey starts, and it's kind of quite easy to ignore that sex hasn't been that good because you're busy with kids, with jobs.
Well, it'll get squeezed out, doesn't it, for a lot of people?
It gets squeezed out, and sometimes it's kind of a convenient, I don't like to use the word excuse, but busy with the kids, busy with pets and other animals, busy with work. But then when we get to midlife, we might have a bit more time, and then it's like, okay, now we can't. So often women say, I can't avoid it anymore. But over that time, a lot of guilt and shame and worry has built up. So what I then normally find is that the male partner, if it's a male partner, experiences more libido and more spontaneous desire as well. And as a couple, they're assuming that how he is right, and that she should be like him, and that she is faulty because she's not like him.
So I deal with this all the time.
Yes.
I see this so often.
Yeah. She thinks I need to be like him.
It's the benchmark.
Yeah. So then the journey of education begins to explain that what she's feeling, or rather the lack of desire for sex, is entirely normal. When I explain the basics of sex science, of how desire works, of how sex doesn't exist in this box away from the rest of our life, it's impacted by everything else that's happening. When she begins to understand that she's not supposed to be like her male partner, that then opens up a whole world of possibility.
It's a blank space, then you can be who you are.
Absolutely. And typically I'll say what we're taught about sex and how sex should be is kind of this much, when the sexual landscape should be this much. And what happens ideally is she begins to learn and become empowered and learn that she's normal. And ideally he's along on that journey and he learns that what he thought was sex, what they thought was right and good sex, was this much out of this much. And so as individuals and as a couple, their whole sexual world expands into something much more playful, fun, not stressful. And then the key then is making time for it. And then once they get into that, that's then a successful coaching journey.
Well, it sounds fantastic. It sounds like it can open up a whole new world of connection and intimacy in a relationship. So I'm really glad and really grateful to you for sharing that with us and with everybody. And hopefully that will help people feel comfortable about maybe this is something that could help them.
Yeah. Something else that I'd just like to share quickly. I coach couples, I coach women, I coach far more men than people imagine would get in touch with help. For help with sex coaching. And what I find with that, so hearing directly stories from men who feel able to talk about this with me, is that they are actually struggling with a lot of the same things. And I think if I were to do sort of a summary of every client I've ever worked with, but remove anything gendered and show that to someone, you'd actually not be able to guess correctly, not be able to tell. When we all open up and talk, whatever gender we are, we're fundamentally all struggling with the same issues. Obviously things like perimenopause and menopause are unique, but overall it's about not being able to talk about it, not understanding what's actually going on and expecting it to happen spontaneously and without effort and out of nowhere. So actually when couples do start working on this together, they find that they're a lot more similar than they had feared, and that's an important part of the journey as well.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Ruth.